we've spoken about the trends in the past and also your perspective on the future and some of the challenges that we see in IT security. How does Awingu for you fit into that picture?
Yeah, so I mentioned about you have to do something on endpoints and you have to do something in the cloud. Awingu is a part of that solution. I guess there's probably two aspects to this that I see Awingu being very critical. One of those is, I have a device that I either can determine the context of, or I can determine the context of the device. So if I unwind a little bit of what I said a couple minutes ago, you're going to need to have something on the endpoint, and that's only, I think, partially true. I think what you need to be able to do is understand the context of the endpoint, so you can determine what's the most secure way, as well as user experience way that I can have access from that device to an application that's either in the cloud or on premises. And so context of the device becomes critical, and you can't, that context becomes important, and that context is, by the way, what helps a Zscaler is, something that a CrowdStrike provides is they tell you what's going on that device. The nice thing about Awingu is in situations where either the context isn't what you want it to be, or you can't determine the context, you can provide secure access from that device to an application to allow an end user to do their job and accomplish whatever their job is, right? So Awingu provides a way from a security and compliance perspective to provide access from a user to an application that's either in the cloud or on premise when you don't have perfect information about the device. And that's useful and interesting because, once again, if you go talk to a security professional today, they're spending a lot of their time trying to figure out the context of the devices and how they provide secure access based on it. And if you can give them a way to do that such that the context can either trigger to use Awingu or the lack of context can, that solves a big problem for them. So I think that's part one. Part two is you end up, from an IT infrastructure perspective and an access perspective, as I said earlier, we're going to be in a hybrid world where you've got new cloud applications. You maybe have apps that sit in a private cloud that you manage, and then you may have some on-premise apps. You end up having to make trade-offs in your architecture because of those legacy applications, and you want to provide access to them. And this comes down to the protocols for access, and it comes down to how that physical access is managed. The beauty of Awingu is it gives you a way, without having to install infrastructure and VPN concentrators, to install a gateway that basically gives your users access to these legacy servers as if they were on the enterprise network, even if they're not, in a secure and compliant way. So this one solves I'm going to have legacy apps for a long time. I really don't want to have to completely change what my IT architecture looks like to provide that access. Awingu gives you a way to do that in a modern, secure, compliant way. That's probably the other use case that I think where Awingu kind of fits into that model for the next 10 years. I mean, I think everybody's going to need some ability to go to legacy applications in a seamless, secure, compliant way that has a great end user experience. So Awingu. And then I think everybody also is going to need to have a way of, depending on the context of the device, be able to provide remote desktop access, remote application access from a device. And so those are two, I think, big scenarios I think Awingu solves.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that. I've never explained it myself like this, so I really like it. I say, if I try to play devil's advocate, why am I not using VPN to achieve this?
Well, first I'll tell you is, have you ever run across somebody that says, "Man, I really love my VPN," just from an end user perspective. Now, once again, the beauty is, well, that's not a beauty, but end users don't decide what IT does in terms of access, right? But at least from an end user experience perspective, we're not in the driver's seat. Now, that said, there's all sorts of IT organizations that want to say yes, not no. They want to enable that consumerization of IT and the end user experience of their devices. They measure themselves on that because they believe that all leads to better productivity. Because at the end of the day, that's what IT is for, is enabling the enterprise to do whatever makes that enterprise successful, and happy, productive end users is part of it. So I do think that that's an element to it. But the other element is, and it comes down to, okay, hey, I may have 50% of my applications on premise, but I got 50% in the cloud. And those cloud applications, I don't necessarily need a VPN back into my enterprise to go back out to them. Now, some of the more sophisticated enterprises are going to split tunnel their VPN. So they're going to say, hey, if you're going to a cloud application, you can go straight to it. But if you're going to these, domains or IP addresses, you're going to tunnel through the enterprise. So they can solve that, but it's still clunky, and you're dealt with and left with lower latency and throughput, and it's just the inefficiency of having to go through the internet to your enterprise, back out to the internet to your applications. And that inefficiency just doesn't make sense. And then you've got this cost in the enterprise of maintaining these VPN concentrators that you ultimately don't need. And so from a user experience and then from an efficiency and a cost perspective in the enterprise, where they're already trying to get things out of the data center and into the cloud, the VPNs can go away. I don't know if that made sense. But that'd be my perspective.
I fully agree with you there, Brian. And in addition, what we, if I look at the VPN landscape, I don't even need to pick on one of them because I think all of them have had serious breaches in the last couple of years. The DNA of the technology goes back to, 95 or 96. So it's really time for a change there.
One more point on this, right? One of the biggest problems in the enterprises has been lateral movement in the enterprise, which is an attacker finds a way to get into the network, and then once they're in the network, they move laterally to more high-profile, high-valuable targets. What's one of the ways they get in is they do some type of social engineering attack on an end user that gives them access. And one of the biggest vulnerabilities that VPNs brought was it brought a user that's physically not in the enterprise as complete access to the enterprise as if they were physically in the enterprise. So it ended up becoming a target-rich environment for social engineering attacks and these ways of getting into the enterprise. Because once you can get the credentials to log into an enterprise, you can then find an application or something else that has maybe more valuable data in it. So one of the parts to replacing VPNs and also about how you segment your network is microsegmentation. And this is better done with software than it is done with just a split tunneling approach. It's almost like split tunneling on steroids, but it's every application gets its own tunnel, its own segment. Which once you start doing that, it looks very much like, hey, I'm getting a secure connection for this application from this device. And if that application's in the cloud, it's just straight to that application. There's no reason to create a big tunnel that goes back to the enterprise. So solving the lateral movement of attackers means that a remote user only has access to what they're supposed to have access to, which is like what the software-defined perimeter that was specified by the Cloud Security Alliance is all about. Is something like Awingu provides. Is it really, you get very specific on what people can access and what they can't to limit the ability for an attacker to laterally move inside an enterprise. So that's another huge vulnerability of VPNs is they were always the easiest way in, and then once you're in, it's like you're on the network and so you can see everything on it.